character is built in the fires of adversity, forged like steel until it is strong enough to never break again. Witness the most intense stories of human resilience and the ultimate victory over life's hardest challenges. Subscribe today and find the strength within your own story.
The moment I pulled into the driveway of my Montana fishing cabin, I knew something was wrong. I'd been away 11 months. Work in Phoenix, then my knee surgery, then the long recovery at my sister's place in Tucson. Life had kept me away longer than I'd planned, but I'd finally made the drive up. 6 hours through high desert and then pine country, the kind of drive that usually settles something in my chest. This time it didn't. The gravel path looked freshly raked. Not the way wind and rain leave things, smooth and settled. Raked. Deliberately, and the split rail fence along the left side, the one I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years, had 2 new posts. The wood was pale and bright against the weathered gray of the old rails. I sat in the truck for a long moment, engine idling. My late wife June had loved this place. We'd bought it 22 years ago. A rough A-frame on 11 acres outside Kalispell. She used to say the mountains here looked like they were leaning in to listen. After she passed, 4 years ago now, I kept the property mostly out of stubbornness. Couldn't bring myself to sell something that still smelled like her in the mornings when the wood stove got going. I turned off the engine and got out. Before we go any further, if you're listening right now, drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is there. I always love knowing who's with me on this. The door key worked fine, too fine. The lock had always had a slight catch, a little stiffness you learn to work around. Now it turned like something new. I stepped inside and stood still. No mustiness, no. That particular stillness of a house sealed up through Montana winter. The air moved differently, faintly warm. The fireplace grate had ash in it that wasn't old ash. It was pale and recent, not the blackened crust of something left for a year. I walked through slowly, living room, kitchen, the small back bedroom I used as a den. Everything looked right. June's watercolor of the Flathead River still hung above the mantel. My fishing gear was where I left it. The mounted brook trout above the doorway. Then I got to the bathroom off the main hallway and stopped. The floor was different. June and I had put down that floor ourselves in the summer of 2009. Slate gray tile with a thin white grout line, a cracked tile near the base of the vanity we'd always meant to replace. It had been cracked since 2014 when I dropped a cast iron skillet while trying to fix the plumbing. The cracked tile was gone. The whole floor had been replaced. Same gray tile, nearly identical, but cleaner, brighter. The grout, a fresh pale white, no crack, perfectly laid. My chest did that thing you used to do in the army. That slow, quiet tightening that isn't quite fear, but is something adjacent to it. I called my son-in-law, 4 rings. Voicemail. I called my daughter, Nora. She picked up on the second ring too quickly, like she'd been waiting. Dad. Hey, you make it up okay? I'm at the cabin. Someone replaced the bathroom floor. A pause. Not long. But there. What do you mean? I mean the floor is new. Someone's been here, Nora. Dad, you're probably just remembering it different. You haven't been up there in almost a year. I know my own floor. Another pause. I'll call you back in a bit, okay? I'm in the middle of something. She hung up. I stood in the hallway and looked at the floor. Nora had been off with me for most of the past year. Short calls, careful answers. Her husband Owen had lost a significant contract at his consulting firm around 10 months ago, something he'd mentioned once and then never brought up again. They had 2 kids, a mortgage in Bozeman, and the particular pride of people who don't ask for help. I'd offered twice. Both times she said they were fine. I remembered then that June had insisted on a security camera. 2 years before she died, someone had broken into the Hendersons' place 3 miles up the road. Nothing major, some fishing gear and a generator, but it had spooked her. She'd had me mount a small weatherproof camera above the front door and another at the back corner of the house, aimed at the yard and the side entrance to the basement. I hadn't thought about those cameras in 2 years. I got my phone out and opened the app. The front camera footage loaded first. I scrolled back to October 11 months ago, a few weeks after I'd locked up and left. For a while, nothing. Deer. Wind moving through the aspens. A raccoon at 2 a.m. on a 2D. Then November 4th, 4:22 in the afternoon. A truck pulled in. A blue F-150 I recognized as Owen's. He got out first, then Nora, then their 2 kids, my grandchildren, 8 and 10 years old, carrying backpacks. They looked tired. Owen had a look on his face I'd seen before in my years as a high school principal, the look of a man managing something he couldn't fully control. They stayed 3 days that first time, came back in December, then again in January, February, March. By April, they appeared to be living there full time. I watched footage for an hour. I watched Owen restacking firewood, methodical, working quickly. I watched Nora sitting on the porch steps in early morning, coffee in both hands, staring at the tree line. I watched my granddaughter doing homework at the kitchen table. The one June refinished the summer before her diagnosis. I felt 2 things simultaneously. The first was something warm. They'd come here. Of all the places they could have gone when things got hard, they'd come here. The second thing was a cold and quiet dread, because I knew that wasn't the whole story. People living quietly in a family member's empty cabin don't replace the bathroom floor and hope it goes unnoticed. People living quietly don't cover their tracks. I went back to the footage and looked harder. March 11th. Owen alone. He arrived at 7 in the morning. He brought bags from his truck, heavy ones, and went straight to the basement. He was down there for 4 hours. When he came up, he was sweating despite the cold, and he carried nothing out. I scrolled forward to March 14th. Nora arrived alone this time, walked the perimeter of the house slowly like she was checking something, then went inside and didn't come out for 2 hours. March 28th. Owen again. This time he brought a man I didn't recognize. Dark jacket, quick movements, the kind of efficiency you associate with people paid to do something specific and leave. They carried what looked like sealed plastic crates into the basement. 2 trips each. I sat on the bed in the back room and tried to think clearly. Owen had always been hard to read. Smart, personable, the kind of man who asked good questions at family dinners and then didn't follow up on the answers. Nora loved him in the way of someone who decided to love him, which is a different thing than falling. I'd respected him mostly, but kept a kind of careful distance. I called Nora again. She answered on the first ring this time. "Dad, I was just about to call you back. I've been watching the camera footage." Silence. Nora, her breathing changed. Slower, deliberate, the way she breathed when she was trying not to cry. "How much did you watch?" "All of it, including March." A long pause. "Dad, please. Please don't go into the basement." "Why?" Her voice dropped so low I had to press the phone hard against my ear. "Because if you do, there's no going back. For any of us." "What is Owen into?" She made a sound I hadn't heard from her since she was a child, a sound like something breaking very quietly. "I'll explain everything. Just please, don't touch anything down there. Please wait for me. I'm 3 hours away." "I'll drive up tonight." She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand. Out the window, the mountain caught the last of the afternoon light, going amber and then deep gold. June's Mountain. I used to tease her that she'd named it in her head and wouldn't tell me what she'd called it. She'd been a practical woman. Keep a camera. Keep a crowbar in the truck. You never know. I went down to the basement. The stairs creaked the same way they always had, 3rd step and 7th step. The basement was part storage, part workshop. My old workbench along the north wall. Shelving units I'd built in 2006. A chest freezer in the corner, unplugged. Everything looked the same except for one section of shelving along the east wall. The units there had been shifted slightly, not much, maybe 8 inches, but the dust pattern on the concrete floor didn't match. There were clean rectangular marks where the units had recently sat, and then the units themselves, an inch or 2 from where they'd always been. I moved them the rest of the way. Behind them, built into the concrete block wall, was a section that had been recently patched. The mortar was noticeably lighter than the surrounding blocks. New work against old, about 2 feet wide, 3 feet high. I went back upstairs to the truck for my pry bar. June had made me start carrying one after we got stuck behind a jackknife semi outside Missoula in 2016. 15 minutes in a pry bar and we were moving again. She was practical like that, always thinking one step ahead of the problem. I worked carefully at the patched mortar. It came out easier than I expected. Behind it was a cavity, rough and dark, and inside the cavity were the plastic crates from the footage. 3 of them, sealed, stacked. I pulled them out one at a time. My back made its opinions known. I ignored them. The first crate held paper, physical documents, binders, printed emails, signed contracts, ledgers with handwritten notations. The second held hard drives, 4 of them, each labeled in Owen's tight, careful handwriting with dates and project names. The third held something that made me sit down on the cold concrete floor, a cell phone in a protective case. A printed photograph of 2 men I didn't recognize shaking hands outside what looked like a government building. A USB drive, and a handwritten note on lined paper. The note was in Owen's writing, Donahue Group, full audit trail, original signed documents, do not digitize, do not photograph. If found, this represents 14 months of documentation. WM knows. Cascade Environmental is fronting it. 3 county commissioners, 2 state officials. Cash transfers begin page 47 of binder 1. I sat there in the basement of my wife's cabin and read it twice. The Donahue Group. I knew that name. Everyone in western Montana knew that name. Robert Donahue had been in the news for 2 years running, a developer and land broker with political connections reaching into Helena and reportedly further. There had been investigations, a legislative committee, news coverage that went hot and then cold and then hot again, land deals, water rights, permits issued and then retroactively justified. The kind of corruption that moves slowly because it has money and patience. Owen had worked as a compliance auditor. That was how Nora had described his job when they first got together. He reviewed financial records for clients, made sure things were documented correctly. I had never fully understood what that meant until right now. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Calhoun. My name is Ted Wren. I work for the Donahue Group. I believe we have a mutual interest in resolving a sensitive situation. I said nothing. We understand you've recently returned to your property in Kalispell. We simply want to have a conversation. My colleagues are outside your door right now. Please come up and let them in. I looked at the ceiling as if I could see through it to the front door. Footsteps on the porch. 1 set, then 2. A knock. Mr. Calhoun. This is much simpler than it seems. Nothing needs to escalate. The doorbell. Then a louder knock. I set the phone down without hanging up and looked at the crates. 14 months of documentation. Owen had been building this for over a year. Whatever had scared them badly enough to disappear into my cabin and hide evidence in my basement wall, it had been building for a long time. I thought about Nora on the porch steps in February, both hands around her coffee cup, staring at the tree line like she was calculating something. I thought about June, who had once told me, when I was agonizing over whether to report a fellow administrator for falsifying student records, that the right thing and the easy thing almost never live at the same address. I loaded the crates into 2 duffel bags I found on the shelf. My back screamed. I told her we'd discuss this later. The knocking continued, more insistent now. I went to the back of the basement. There's a window there, low to the ground, that opens onto the north side of the property where the land drops off toward the creek. June had always wanted me to seal it. I had always meant to and never did. I forced it open. It took both hands and a fair amount of profanity. I pushed the duffel bags through first, heard them land in the brush, then I went through myself, which was not graceful. And I am 63 years old with a surgically repaired knee, and I will not describe it further. I landed, grabbed the bags, and moved toward the tree line. The creek was 60 yards north. I could hear it. Behind me, I heard the front door, then voices inside the house, then a shout. I moved faster than I had any right to, given my knee and the bags and the fact that it was getting dark. But there's a thing that happens when your family is at stake. Some old override that doesn't care about your orthopedic history. June and I had walked every inch of this land. I knew where the path curved west toward the footbridge. I knew where the underbrush thinned near the old logging cut. I moved through the dark by memory more than sight. One hand out for branches, the bags knocking against my legs. Behind me, flashlight beams cut through the trees. I reached the creek and crossed at the shallow point, soaking both shoes, and kept going up the far bank toward the forest road that runs along the ridge. My knee sent up opinions with every step. I kept moving. I don't know exactly how long I walked. 20 minutes, maybe 30. The flashlights fell behind and then disappeared. Either they'd lost me in the dark or they'd gone back for something. I came out on the forest road just as headlights appeared from the south. The truck slowed. A young deputy got out, pan near his hip, flashlight on me. "Sir, are you Miles Calhoun?" "Yes. We received a 911 call reporting a disturbance at your property." "Are you all right?" I stood there in soaked shoes with 2 duffels full of evidence against one of the most politically connected developers in the state, and I thought about what June would say. "Tell the truth, Miles. You always overthink the part that comes after." "I need to call my nephew," I said. "He's a federal prosecutor." The deputy blinked. "Right now," I said. Before anything else. He let me make the call. My nephew Roger picked up on the second ring. I told him what I had. He was quiet for a long moment, the particular quiet of someone thinking very quickly. "Uncle Miles, do not let local law enforcement take that evidence. You understand me? Don't sign anything. Don't hand anything over. Tell them federal jurisdiction is being asserted. I'm calling the FBI field office in Missoula right now. You stay exactly where you are." The deputy stood 6 feet away looking uncertain. I told him what Roger said. He didn't look happy, but he didn't argue. 2 hours later, a federal vehicle arrived. A woman in her 40s, with short dark hair, and the kind of stillness that makes you feel like she's cataloged everything in the room before she said hello. "Mr. Calhoun. I'm Special Agent Diane Chu, FBI Missoula." She paused. "We've had an active investigation into the Donahue Group for 19 months. I handed her the duffel bags. She opened the first one and looked at the binders for a long time without touching them. Then she looked up at me. "Where did your son-in-law get these?" "He was a compliance auditor for one of Donahue's subsidiaries for 3 years. He said he started documenting when he realized what he was actually auditing." She nodded slowly. "We knew there was a source. We didn't know where the physical documents had gone." She looked back at the binders. "These are originals." "Yes." She was quiet again, calculating something. "We need to find your son-in-law and daughter tonight. Are they safe?" "I hope so," I said. "She's driving up from Bozeman." "We'll meet her," Agent Chu said. She stepped away and made a call. I sat in the back of the federal vehicle with a foil blanket around my shoulders that I hadn't asked for, and a cup of coffee I was grateful for. And I thought about Owen, who I had never quite trusted, building a paper trail for 14 months while my daughter held her fear together with both hands and my grandchildren did their homework at June's kitchen table. It took 6 more hours to understand the full shape of what had happened. Owen had joined Donahue's subsidiary 3 years ago through a legitimate hiring process. 18 months in, he'd found the first irregularity. A land transfer that didn't match the public record. He'd flagged it internally. His supervisor, a man named Greer, had told him to let it go, that it was above his pay grade, that he should be careful. Owen hadn't let it go. Over the following year, he'd built the file systematically, carefully, the way a methodical man does when he understands that what he's found could either protect him or destroy him, depending on how he handled it. Cash transfers, forged environmental assessments, county commissioners receiving payments routed through shell LLCs, state officials signing off on permits that shouldn't have been issued. When Greer died in a car accident on an empty stretch of highway outside Missoula, Owen stopped going to work. He didn't go to the FBI immediately. Agent Chu explained this without judgment. He'd gone to a private attorney first. The attorney had reviewed the documents, expressed serious concern, and then had a heart attack 2 weeks later. 51 years old, no cardiac history. After that, Owen didn't trust anyone. He came to my cabin because it was remote, because Donahue's people wouldn't immediately connect it to him, and because it was the safest place he could think of. He hadn't told Nora everything. He'd told her enough to be scared, not enough for her to understand why. She arrived at the federal staging area at 2 a.m., Nora in her coat over what looked like pajamas, her face doing the thing where she's trying not to show how frightened she is. We looked at each other across a parking lot lit by portable lights. Then she walked over and held on to me for a long time without saying anything. "I'm sorry, Dad." "I know. I should have called you the moment Owen showed me the first document. I should have told you what was happening. I kept thinking we could handle it ourselves, and then it got too big and I didn't know how to start. You're starting now." She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were red. "Is Owen going to be okay?" Agent Chu stepped in beside us. Mr. Calhoun cooperated fully with an ongoing federal investigation. He documented crimes that 3 separate agencies have been trying to prove for 2 years. She paused. "We're offering him full cooperating witness status. He and your family will have protection through the duration of the trial." Nora looked at me. I squeezed her hand. The trial itself came 14 months later. I drove back to Montana for the opening arguments and stayed through the week. Owen testified for 3 days. He was methodical on the stand, precise, patient, a man who had spent 18 months building a case and understood how to present it. When the defense attorneys pushed, he didn't get flustered. He said, "I documented what I found. I documented it because I understood it was real. I documented it because I believed that eventually the truth would matter more than the money." Robert Donahue was convicted on 29 counts. 3 county commissioners, 1 state official. Greer's so-called accident was reclassified. Cascade Environmental, the front company, was dissolved. The Donahue Group was finished. The last evening before I drove home, I went back to the cabin alone. I'd had the basement wall properly repaired and the mortar sealed. I'd left the bathroom floor the way Owen had laid it. No reason to tear it up. It was good work. Even and clean, no cracked tile. I stood in the hallway and looked at it for a while. June had refinished the kitchen table the summer before her diagnosis. She'd done the whole thing by hand, sanding and staining, taking her time. My granddaughter still does her homework there when they visit. I like that. I went out to the porch and sat in the same chair where Nora had sat in February with her coffee, looking at the mountains. It was evening, the sky going deep blue behind the peaks. The first stars coming up. The air smelled like pine and coming cold. My knee ached from all of it. I didn't mind. I thought about Owen, who I'd kept at arm's length for 10 years because he was hard to read, who had spent 14 months doing something genuinely brave in a way that cost him everything temporarily and would give his family back something permanently. I thought about how often I'd mistaken reticence for evasiveness, how many times I'd watched him at the dinner table and clocked his careful answers as something vaguely suspicious, when maybe it was just that he was a private man who carried things alone. I thought about Nora saying, "I should have called you the moment I knew." We do that. We decide we can carry things alone, because asking for help feels like admitting something, and we protect the people we love by keeping them uninformed, and then the weight gets too great and we have to hide evidence in their walls. My granddaughter called the night before I left Kalispell. She was 12. She said, "Grandpa, Mom told us a little bit about what happened. She said you were really brave." And then she said, "In the way of children who haven't yet learned to soften things, were you scared?" I thought about being in those dark woods with my knees complaining and 2 duffel bags and a flashlight behind me. "Yes," I said. "Quite scared. But you kept going anyway." "That's usually what you have to do," I told her. I didn't hear June's voice in the cabin when I left, not exactly, but I felt the particular silence of a house that had held something difficult and been cleaned of it. The camera above the door, the pry bar in the truck, the floor that wasn't cracked anymore. She'd always been 1 step ahead of the problem. I locked the door and drove south as the stars came fully out over the mountains. The drive home was 6 hours, and I didn't turn on the radio. I just thought about my family, alive and intact, and finally honest with each other, and how that was the only thing that had ever really mattered. The lesson I carried home from all of it was this: when someone you love goes quiet in a way that isn't like them, when they stop calling, when their answers get short and careful, when they seem to be managing something they won't name, don't wait. Reach toward them. Don't assume they'll come to you when they're ready. Sometimes people are so deep in something they can no longer see the way out, and the only thing that saves them is someone they trust at deciding to walk in. And if you're over 60 and your family thinks you're too old to be useful in a crisis, remind them that 63 years of living teaches you things that youth and strength simply cannot. How to move quietly through country you know. How to wait. How to read the shape of a lie. How to trust someone you love, even after they've given you reason not to. That's not weakness getting older. That's the whole point. Looking back on everything that happened at that cabin, I keep coming back to one simple truth. The floor gave it away. Not the documents, not the cameras, not the men in the black SUV at my door. A bathroom floor that was too clean, too new, too careful. 40 years of paying attention, first in the classroom, then in an administrative office, watching kids and parents and teachers navigate hard situations, and it turns out the most important skill I ever built was just that. Noticing when something small is wrong. Owen had done everything right in the wrong order. He found the truth, he documented it, he protected it. But he tried to carry it alone, and the weight of that broke something in his family that didn't need to be broken. He hid evidence in my wall when he could have called me. Nora watched her children do homework at June's old kitchen table and cried on the back porch and still didn't pick up the phone. Both of them made the same mistake, which is believing that love means protecting someone from the difficult thing rather than trusting them with it. That mistake almost cost them everything, not because the universe punishes people for being private, but because secrets have a practical weight. They slow you down. They isolate you. They force you to make decisions alone that were never meant to be made alone. And when those decisions go wrong, you have nobody nearby to help you course correct. Owen kept doubling down on a plan that had too many moving parts and no backup, and the longer it went, the more fragile it became. That's not a moral failing. That's just what happens when you remove trust from the equation. What I want people to take from this is not that I was brave, because honestly, most of what I did in those woods was just stubborn. 63 years old, bad knee, soaking wet shoes, and I kept moving because there was no other reasonable option. That's not courage. That's just arithmetic. The thing I'm prouder of is what happened after. Sitting in that federal vehicle with a foiled blanket while Nora drove 3 hours in the dark to reach us. I didn't lead with the anger I had every right to feel. I led with the question of whether she was okay. That was a choice, and I made it deliberately because I understood that what she needed in that moment was not an accounting of her mistakes. She knew her mistakes. She'd been living inside them for almost a year. The real lesson Owen learned, the one I watched settle into him over the months of testimony and aftermath, is that integrity only protects you if you follow it all the way through. He did the hard work of documenting the truth, but then he flinched at the last step, which was trusting the right people with it. He tried to stay in control of something that had grown beyond his control, and that's where things went sideways. The moment he committed fully, when the evidence was finally in the right hands, everything started resolving. Not easily, not painlessly, but in the direction of right. My granddaughter asked me if I was scared. I was. Being scared is not the problem. The problem is letting fear make your decisions for you. The only way through hard things is to keep moving, keep thinking, and keep trusting the people who have earned it. That's it. That's the whole lesson. It took 11 months of a hidden floor and a wall full of evidence and one very cold creek crossing to get there. But there it is.